Afternoon, everyone. It's Victoria Wilson here with Motherwell Doula Service, and I am thinking a lot about cervical checks this week, and I thought you might want to know what all of those numbers mean when you get a cervical check at the end of your pregnancy. So the question of whether or not you might want to check is a totally different story, but let's say you do want to get checked. Just keep in mind that whatever number you ever get in a check, it tells you what is happening at that moment in time. So cervical checks are not crystal balls, right? They're not predictors of the future. It is just a measure of what's going on with your body, in particular your cervix, at that time. And so I think we all, if you've been pregnant, you probably have heard about checked, or if you have had a friend in labor, a lot of times people are asking her like, hey, did you get checked? What did they say? How far along are you? That kind of thing. Those questions are all answered by a cervical check. So first of all, I've stolen my daughter's Play-Doh, and I've made a little cervix here. So we're going to talk about that. So, and let me get one thing. Hold on. Okay, so this is my pretend cervix. And the first number, of course, everyone wants to know about is dilation, which is how large or small is the opening in your cervix. And I always tell people this, but it's good to remember that your cervix is not the outside of your vagina, okay? So if this is your uterus, the cervix is this little circular opening at the bottom of your uterus. And this whole anatomy is up inside you, right? It's kind of up in your pelvis. Sometimes if you've ever, put in a tampon, for example, or maybe you've even tried to check yourself, something like that, and you kind of hit the little part that feels a little bit like a nose, that's your cervix. So again, we are not talking about how open the outside of your body will be. We're talking about your cervix, which is at the bottom of your uterus. So dilation, how open is your cervix is the first question. This pretend cervix is, I don't know, probably like a centimeter dilated. A centimeter is like the end of your pinky or Cheerio. So you see I get my little pinky finger in there. That's probably about a centimeter. Here is also a visual of slightly bigger. This is about a 2 centimeter hole. So that's a little bit bigger, kind of like a blueberry size maybe. Kind of like a finger and a half. That's 2 centimeters. So how open is your cervix? Again, we all know that the magic number everyone wants to know about is 10. And that is this big, which, my fist can totally fit through there. Your baby's head can totally fit through this. It's about the size of a bagel when it's all told. But before I get to making my little pretend cervix bigger than about a centimeter here, the other number we're going to talk about is effacement. So effacement is measured in a percentage, okay? Dilation is measured in centimeters, of course, at 1 through 10. Effacement is measured in a percentage, 0 to 100. And effacement is how thick your cervix is. So you can see my Play-Doh cervix here is pretty thick. This is pretty much what a cervix looks like normally. It's kind of thick, tight, closed, which is good because the cervix, right, is kind of holding. We don't want our uteruses like open to everything all the time. A cervix can kind of protecting your baby from coming out too soon. It's holding up the amniotic sac, all of this good stuff. So anyway, we want a nice thick high cervix through our pregnancy, and then at the end, slowly, what's going to happen, see if I can make this happen, is your cervix will start to thin out or go away. And so you might kind of notice, just as I'm molding this Play-Doh to be a little thinner for the visual, what's happening to the dilation of our pretend cervix. It's also opening. And what makes this happen in your body is your baby's, got my nice baby here, your baby's head putting pressure on that cervix is what is opening it. So at the end of your pregnancy, you might have a lot of Braxton Hicks contractions, they're called. I like to call them practice contractions because a lot of times they are doing something, even if it's just kind of gently your baby, touching, bouncing your cervix open, thinning it out. So we'll say that first cervix I showed you, sorry, I've thinned it out already, was probably, we'll say like 0, like it wasn't thin at all. This, I'm not a midwife, of course, I don't quite, I've not felt this clinically, but we'll maybe say, let's say this cervix is maybe like 50% effaced, okay? So you see how it's thinned out. Before it was much thicker, now it's thinner. And also what happened, the cervix opened as it was thinning out. So this is probably 4 to 5 centimeters. I've got a little cheat sheet here. I'm gonna check myself against it. Ooh, right on. This is 5 centimeters. Okay, so this is maybe a 50% effaced, very thick 5 centimeter cervix. And again, what's doing that is your baby's head over at the end of pregnancy and labor. It's kind of slowly putting the contractions are making your uterus kind of just nudge your baby down. It's almost like a bounce, right? This is kind of what's happening throughout the end of pregnancy and labor. Cervix is opening. So we talked about dilation, effacement. The last thing you hear in pelvic checks is the station. And so stations are measured usually, it's technically -5 up through +5. The numbers I usually hear in a check, especially in a pregnancy, might be something like -2, -3. And that number is where your baby's head is in relation to the ischial spines, which are right here. It's kind of hard to see. They're right here inside the pelvis. And so, again, my trusty baby, which I'm very thankful to my boss, is letting me borrow her baby model. One day I will have one of these myself, but I'm very grateful to borrow hers. So I'm gonna tuck up this baby for a second, just kind of like it would be inside. And so the station is where your baby's head is in relation to those ischial spines. And so right here, eek, this is really hard to do. This is probably like a, I don't know, like -3, -2 baby, still really high in your pelvis and not engaged. And then through the end of pregnancy and the end of labor, right, your baby's head is gonna slowly start passing through your pelvis. And it's that top of the head, you see where it's hitting in relation to the spine. This might be something like 0 station. And then +1, +2 is kind of on its way out. It's kind of hard to position this baby. +1, +2 would kind of be like the baby coming out. Yeah, does that make sense? When we're up to like +5, that's kind of like crowning your babies out. So, so providers will usually say something like, oh, it's still -2 or -3, you're still really high in your pelvis. Hi, people watching, tell me if you have any questions. That's what they mean. So does this kind of make sense? But you can tell, right, that pressure you're feeling when that baby's head starts to engage. At the end of pregnancy, a lot of women will say their baby's dropped, or they notice, suddenly if you notice you can breathe all of a sudden, that means your baby was a lot higher, but they've dropped into your pelvis. So, but the droppings, they still can be pretty high in relation to like where your cervix is, where your vagina or the birth canal is, and then again, on its way out. I don't really like forcing this baby through. It kind of freaks me out. But anyway, you get what I'm saying, pushing it through. So, hi, Jolyn. It's good to see you. So, those are the 3 numbers that we hear, dilation, effacement, station. That's what they mean. And again, I'm going to kind of dilate out and efface out this cervix a little bit more. When your baby is coming out, this is basically what it will look like. That cervix kind of totally just disappears, you see, like around the baby's head. So this is kind of what we're looking for, is just like the cervix to totally thin out, totally come away from there. And then this is probably like, this is 10 centimeters. That baby is gonna start coming through. Sometimes what can happen, since we're talking, and I got my nice cervix here, sometimes what can happen is you will have a cervical lip, or an anterior or posterior lip. Usually it's an anterior one. And that means that, hold on, let me make my cervix again. That just means that part of the cervix has not totally disappeared, like around the baby's head, or totally thinned out. So that would mean that you would have one side that's still really bulky and thick, and then the other side is very thin. Can you kind of see that? Yeah, so that lip, we can do a lot of things to take care of. You know, sometimes if a mom has been laboring, I just was at a birth, mom was laboring really well for a long time. She was 9 centimeters, you know, but she wasn't feeling the urge to push yet. So she had her provider check and was confirmed like, oh yeah, you have an anterior lip, which can kind of prevent that baby from just making that last little oomph through like to get the cervix over its head, to get through the pelvis. So what we can do is we can sometimes move the mom to where she's more of her gravity is on the side of the lip. So sometimes we can put the baby's head, you know, like on that lip so it presses down some. Moving positions. There is an acupressure point that is said to reduce the cervical lip. I covered that in my evidence-based birth childbirth class, which is pretty cool. I've not yet had a chance to use it. Didn't need to use it in that birth I mentioned, but there is one. Yeah, so thanks for watching this video. I hope it helps in your next appointment. If you liked it and liked what you learned, you should definitely think about signing up for a childbirth class, and I have several starting this year. And it looks like my family just got home, so I'm gonna go hang out with them. Thanks, guys.